The rain had started earlier than expected, soft at first, then turning into a steady drizzle that blurred the glowing lights of downtown Seattle. Emily Parker stood under the restaurant's small awning, holding her phone and staring at the last message from her husband, Mark. "Sorry, love. Can't make it tonight. Big project. Rain check." She sighed quietly. It was the third time that month. Dinner plans, promises. And little moments they all seemed to vanish into. Mark's endless work hours. Emily wrapped her coat around her shoulders and glanced down the street, hoping for a taxi, but most cars were already taken. The street was shiny and wet, the reflection of headlights stretching like ribbons of light across the pavement. She felt small standing there, half damp, half forgotten. From across the parking lot, she heard her name. Emily. "Hey." She turned to see Daniel Reed walking toward her, umbrella in hand, his dark coat catching drops of rain. He smiled in that calm, easy way people do when they aren't rushing anywhere. Daniel had been Mark's friend since college. Kind, charming, always polite, but someone she'd only met a handful of times. "You're soaked," he said, raising the umbrella over her head. "Let me give you a ride home." "Oh, that's really kind, but I can call a cab," Emily replied, brushing rain from her hair. Daniel shook his head. "Come on, you'll be waiting forever in this weather. I insist." Something in his tone made her stop resisting. Maybe it was the rain or the loneliness she didn't want to admit. But she nodded and followed him to his car. Inside, the warmth felt like a small relief. The windshield wipers moved rhythmically, cutting through sheets of rain. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel glanced at her and smiled. "Rough evening." Emily exhaled. "You could say that. My husband got stuck at work again. I'm starting to think I should make dinner plans with his laptop instead." Daniel chuckled softly. "That sounds familiar. Mark used to be like that even in college, always chasing deadlines." "Yeah," she said with a faint smile. "And I thought he'd slow down after we got married." The car turned onto quieter streets, the hum of the tires steady against the rain. They began to talk more easily, the way two people sometimes do when there's no expectation of pretending. Emily told him about her job at the local art gallery, about how she used to paint before life got busy. Daniel listened intently, not just nodding, but asking thoughtful questions. "Do you still paint?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not in a long time. I guess I ran out of time and inspiration." "That's a shame," he said. "You always seemed like the kind of person who saw beauty in small things." "That's rare." His words caught her off guard. It wasn't flirting, it was something deeper, a kind of understanding. And it had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way with genuine interest. Instead of casual politeness, the conversation drifted from art to music, to how Seattle's rain could either soothe you or swallow you whole depending on your mood. Daniel spoke about his work in real estate, about how he traveled often but was thinking of settling down. He said he envied people who had roots, who built quiet lives instead of constantly chasing change. Emily listened, realizing she had spent so much of her life holding things together that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be simply seen. The sound of the rain outside became softer, almost comforting. When they reached her street, Danielle slowed down and parked near her driveway. The house looked warm from the outside, the porch light still on Mark's habit, always thoughtful even when absent. Emily hesitated before reaching for the door handle. She didn't want the moment to end so quickly. "Thank you for the ride," she said softly. "And for the company." Daniel smiled. "Any time. You shouldn't have to wait alone in the rain." Then his voice grew quieter, more sincere. "Emily, you deserve to be listened to. You know that?" She froze. The words were simple, yet they struck something deep in her chest. She wasn't sure what to say. She managed a small smile. "That's kind of you to say." He nodded gently, "Just telling the truth." She stepped out into the cool night, the rain falling softer now, but her heart was racing. She walked slowly up to her front door, feeling his gaze on her for a brief moment before his car pulled away into the dark. Inside the house, the silence felt louder than ever. She slipped off her shoes, set her coat aside, and stood by the window. Watching the rain drip from the trees, something inside her felt unsettled, not in a dangerous or forbidden way, but in a human way. Someone had reminded her what it felt like to be noticed, to be valued without expectation. It was startling. It was confusing. But more than anything, it was awakening something she hadn't felt in years. Awareness of herself as more than a routine, more than someone's waiting place. She walked to the kitchen, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the table. The clock ticked softly in the background. She looked around the house, the framed wedding photo on the wall, the neat rows of dishes, the notes Mark left on the fridge. Life looked perfect on the surface. But deep down, she knew something had shifted, something small but real. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. "Sorry again. Hope you got home safe. Love you." She stared at the words for a long moment before replying, "I'm home. All good." But even as she sent it, her thoughts drifted back to Daniel's voice, calm, gentle, genuine. "You deserve to be listened to." That night, she lay in bed listening to the rain hit the window. She tried to sleep, but the ride replayed in her mind like a quiet movie. The warmth of the car, the sound of his laughter, the way he asked about her dreams without judgment. It wasn't about attraction, not really. It was about something deeper, being understood, and as she finally drifted into sleep, one thought lingered softly at the edge of her mind: how a single, unexpected moment, a simple offer to drive her home, could make her question the life she had always thought was complete. Little did she know, that small act of kindness was not the end of something ordinary. It was the quiet beginning of everything that would follow. The next morning, Emily woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting soft golden lines across the room. Mark was already gone for work, his side of the bed cold, his coffee mug rinsed and left neatly by the sink. It was their routine quiet mornings, polite texts through the day, and tired conversations at night. She made herself breakfast, but everything tasted dull. Still, she smiled to herself as she remembered last night's ride, the warmth of the car, the sound of rain, and Daniel's simple words that wouldn't leave her mind. "You deserve to be listened to." At work, Emily tried to focus. The gallery was preparing for a new art exhibit, and she had a list of things to finish. But between emails and phone calls, her mind kept drifting back to Daniel. She told herself it wasn't wrong. He had just been kind. Still, something inside her stirred each time she remembered his tone, steady, sincere, and without judgment. That evening when she returned home, Mark was sitting at the table with his laptop open. "Hey, how's your day?" he asked without looking up. "Busy," she said softly. "Yours." He mumbled something about deadlines and meetings, then excused himself to take a work call. Emily nodded, pretending not to feel the familiar ache of distance. She washed the dishes slowly, staring at the sink, wondering if this quiet emptiness was just how marriage settled over time. 3 days later, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Daniel. Just checking if you made it home dry this time." Emily smiled before she could stop herself. "I did. Thanks for saving me from the rain last week," she replied. His answer came quickly. "Anytime. I'm glad I was around. How have you been?" That one question opened the door to more. What started as a friendly exchange turned into small daily conversations about work, life, movies, books, and sometimes little things that made her laugh. Daniel had a quiet sense of humor and a way of listening that felt rare. He didn't interrupt, didn't change the subject to himself, he simply heard her. One afternoon, when her office felt too silent, Emily found herself waiting for his text. It came like clockwork. "Don't forget to take a break today. You sound like someone who forgets to breathe when she's busy." She laughed softly at her desk, shaking her head, typing back, "You might be right." When she got home that evening, Mark was once again glued to his computer. "You okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up briefly. "Yeah, just swamped. Sorry, I'll be done soon." She wanted to tell him she missed him, not just his presence, but the him she used to know, the man who once surprised her with flowers, who used to dance with her in the kitchen. But the words never came out. Instead, she nodded and went upstairs, feeling an invisible space growing between them. A week later, Emily stopped by a small cafe on her lunch break. She was waiting for her drink when a familiar voice said, "So, you do drink coffee after all?" She turned and saw Daniel, smiling, holding a paper cup. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" she asked, surprised. "I was just across the street for a meeting." "Guess luck's on my side," he said lightly. They sat down together at a corner table, the conversation flowing effortlessly. He told her about his real estate projects, his travel stories, and how quiet his apartment felt after long days. She told him about her art gallery, about the upcoming exhibit, and almost without realizing about the loneliness that had crept into her marriage. Daniel didn't judge. He just listened, eyes steady and kind. "You're too hard on yourself," he said after a moment. "You give so much, Emily. Maybe you just need someone to give back." The words hit her heart like a soft echo. She looked down, stirring her coffee, unsure what to say. There was no flirting, no hidden suggestions, just truth. And it stung because it felt real. They talked for another half hour until she had to leave for work. As she stood up, Daniel smiled gently. "It was nice seeing you again. You have that look in your eyes like you're starting to remember who you are." She laughed quietly. "Maybe I am." When Emily returned home that night, Mark was already asleep on the couch, his phone buzzing with unread emails. She stood there for a while, watching him, wondering when their love had become a schedule instead of a heartbeat. She pulled a blanket over him and went upstairs. Lying in bed, she thought about Daniel. Not in a romantic way, but in a human way. He had reminded her of something. She had buried her curiosity, her laughter, her need to be seen. She missed those parts of herself, and she hated that it took another man to make her notice. Over the next few days, Emily tried to distance herself. She replied to Daniel less, focused on work, and spent more time at home. But the silence felt heavier than before. Mark was still working late, their dinners still rushed, their words still few. One evening, Mark noticed her quietness. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing up from his laptop. "Yeah, just tired," she said. "You should take a break," he said kindly. "Maybe a spa day or something." She smiled faintly, but inside she wanted him to say more too, ask more. But he didn't, and that was the difference. The next morning, as Emily drove to work, she thought about her life, how it looked perfect to everyone else, but felt hollow from the inside. She wasn't unhappy, not exactly. Just lost. Later that day, Daniel sent a simple message. "Hey, I'm around your area for work. Want to grab a quick coffee?" She stared at her phone for a long time before replying. "I can't today. Maybe another time," he wrote back. "Of course. Take care of yourself, Emily." The message was ordinary, but it made her chest tighten. He cared not in the way Mark once did, but in the way people do when they truly notice your silence. That night, Emily sat on her bed and opened her old sketchbook. Dust clung to the edges, but the pages were still white, waiting. She picked up a pencil and began to draw soft lines, abstract shapes, the start of something that felt familiar and alive. For the first time in a long while, she didn't think about Mark or Daniel. She thought about herself, still, when she looked at the half-finished sketch. She knew the truths. Something inside her was changing. Not into love or betrayal, but into awareness. Daniel's friendship had become a mirror, showing her the parts of herself she had forgotten. And though she didn't know where it would lead, she couldn't deny one simple fact. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't a stranger's affection, it's being reminded of what your heart has quietly been missing. A few weeks passed, and Emily thought she had managed to steady her thoughts. Her conversations with Daniel had slowed down, though every time her phone buzzed, her heart still skipped. Life had slipped back into routine work. Dinners alone, polite exchanges with Mark, but something inside her had changed. She felt aware now, more awake. As if her life had been running quietly on pause until that night in the rain. One Friday afternoon, Mark came home early, which was rare. He looked cheerful for the first time in months. Guess what? he said, placing his laptop bag on the couch. "Daniel's back in town for a bit. I invited him for dinner tonight. Thought it'd be nice to catch up properly." Emily froze. Her heart fluttered with a mix of surprise and worry. "Tonight?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, don't worry. I'll grab a bottle of wine on my way back. You two can handle the cooking just like the old days." She nodded weakly, forcing a smile. Sure, sounds nice. But inside she felt uneasy. It wasn't guilt. Exactly, she hadn't done anything wrong, but she knew things between her and Daniel were no longer simple. There was a quiet understanding between them. Something that words hadn't named, but feelings had recognized. That evening, as she prepared dinner, she caught herself rearranging her hair twice, changing her sweater, checking her reflection in the mirror more than usual. She told herself it was just about wanting to look presentable. But deep down, she knew it was something Elsa needed to prove. To herself, maybe, that she was still noticed. When Daniel arrived, the room seemed to shift. He looked the same calm, confident, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "Emily," he said warmly, "you look great." "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Mark came into the room, greeting Daniel with a friendly hug. The two men laughed about old college stories, teasing each other like brothers. Emily tried to keep her focus on the food, but she could feel Daniel's presence nearby, his voice. His laughter had stirred emotions she had been trying to quiet for weeks. Dinner started pleasantly. The three of them sat around the table, candles flickering, conversation easy. Mark talked about work, Daniel shared his travel stories, and Emily listened, smiling when expected, laughing when something was funny. But beneath it all, there was an invisible current, subtle, unspoken dot. At one point, Mark stepped away to take a phone call. As soon as he left, silence fell between Emily and Daniel. For a few seconds, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. "You've been quiet tonight," Daniel said softly. "Just tired," Emily replied, looking down at her plate. He tilted his head slightly, or trying too hard not to feel something. She looked up, startled. "Daniel, please." He leaned back in his chair, eyes calm but serious. "I'm not saying anything out of line. I can see you're not okay, and I wish I could help." His honesty hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't bold. It was genuine concern. And that sincerity was exactly what made it dangerous. "You shouldn't worry about me," she whispered. "I do, though," he said quietly. "You deserve to be happy, Emily. Really happy." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak but couldn't. Before she could find words, Mark returned to the room, phone still in hand, talking about a project deadline. The moment disappeared like smoke. Dinner continued, but the mood had shifted. Emily laughed where needed. Daniel stayed polite. Mark stayed busy. It felt like everyone was playing a role in a quiet play where no one acknowledged the truth. After the dishes were cleared, Mark offered Daniel a drink in the living room. Emily poured herself a glass of water and stood by the kitchen window, staring into the night. The rain had started again, soft and steady. She heard Daniel's footsteps behind her. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't turn around. "You shouldn't keep asking me that," she said softly. "It makes me think too much." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what you need to think. To feel something again." Emily turned then, her eyes glistening. "You don't understand, Daniel. I have a life, a marriage. I can't just feel whatever I want." He stepped closer, not too close, but enough that she could hear the quiet sincerity in his voice. "I'm not asking you to do anything, Emily. I just don't want you to lose yourself trying to hold on to something that's breaking you." Her breath caught. The words were soft but carried the weight of truth. Before she could answer, Mark called from the living room. "Hey, you two? Come join me before Daniel leaves." They both stepped back quickly, the air between them thick with emotion. Emily wiped at her eyes before walking back, pretending to smile. The rest of the night passed like a blur. Mark and Daniel exchanged more stories. Laughter filled the house, but Emily felt distant, present in body, absent in spirit. When Daniel finally stood to leave, Mark clapped him on the back. "Good seeing you, man. Don't disappear this time." Daniel smiled. "I won't." Then he turned to Emily. "Dinner was wonderful. Thank you." She nodded, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Drive safe." Their gazes lingered for a brief second longer than they should have. Then he was gone. After Mark went to bed, Emily stayed downstairs, cleaning dishes she had already washed. Her mind replayed every word Daniel had said. Don't lose yourself trying to hold on to something that's breaking you. That night, she sat by the window, watching the rain fall in steady streams. Her heart felt heavy, but alive. She wasn't in love with Daniel, that wasn't what it was. It was the truth he'd shown her, a mirror she couldn't ignore anymore. Mark cared for her. But he was consumed by work, by life, by everything except her. And maybe she had been too scared to admit that she missed being seen. Being heard, being loved with presence, not just habits. She didn't sleep much. Around midnight, she picked up her phone, typed Daniel's name into a message, then stopped. What could she possibly say? "Thank you for making me question everything." No, that wouldn't be fair to him or to herself. Instead, she turned off the light and closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "I need to find me again." For the first time, it wasn't about Daniel. It wasn't even about Mark. It was about Emily, the woman she had lost somewhere between responsibilities and silence. She didn't know what would come next. But she knew this much. The night her husband's friend sat at her dinner table had changed everything. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. The unsaid words, quiet looks, the unspoken truth, they were enough to make her see her life with new eyes. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. A few days passed after that dinner, and the silence between Emily and Mark felt heavier than ever. They still shared the same house, the same meals. But something invisible stood between them, like a quiet distance no one dared to name. Mark seemed unaware, caught up in his meetings and phone calls, while Emily carried a storm inside her that no one could see. One afternoon, while running errands after work, Emily stopped by the grocery store. She moved through the aisles absent-mindedly, picking items she barely remembered adding to her list. Just as she was about to leave, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Emily." She turned and saw Daniel standing near the checkout, holding a basket. For a moment, she froze. It had only been a few days since the dinner. But seeing him again brought back every emotion she had been trying to push away. "Hey," she said, trying to sound calm. "Hey," he replied, offering a small smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." They talked briefly about simple things, the weather, work, traffic. But beneath every word, there was something deeper, something neither of them dared to mention. As they reached the parking lot, Daniel noticed the rain beginning to fall again. He looked at her groceries and said, "Let me give you a ride home. It's pouring already." Emily hesitated, her heart caught between caution and comfort. Then she nodded quietly. "All right?" The drive was quiet at first. The rain hit the windshield in steady rhythms, the kind that made conversation unnecessary. Emily watched the water trails run down the window, thinking about how strangely familiar this felt, just like that first night weeks ago. Daniel finally spoke. "I've been thinking about that dinner," he said softly. "You looked sad that night." She smiled faintly. "It was just a long day." He shook his head. "No, it was more than that. You've been holding everything in for too long." Emily didn't answer. Her throat felt tight. She stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur in the rain. After a pause, Daniel continued, "I don't want to make things harder for you, Emily. You have your life, your husband. But I just need you to know something." She turned toward him slightly, waiting. "You don't need someone like me to fix what's missing," he said. "You just need to remember who you are. The woman who used to paint. The woman who laughed easily. The one who didn't apologize for feeling alive." His words caught her off guard. They weren't romantic, they were real. And that made them hurt more. "I don't even know who that woman is anymore," she whispered. Daniel glanced at her, his voice calm. "Then find her again. For you, not for anyone else. By the time they reached her house, the rain had softened into a mist. Daniel parked by the curb and turned off the engine. The world around them was quiet, except for the faint hum of the rain. Emily turned to face him. Thank you for saying that. And for listening. I know this whole thing. It's been strange. He smiled faintly. Strange, yes? But sometimes strange moments remind us what's real. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. You've been kind to me, Daniel. More than you should have been. He shook his head. Kindness isn't a mistake, Emily, but what you do with it, that's what matters. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't reach for her hand. Instead, he said quietly, take care of yourself. And talk to him. He needs to hear you, even if it's hard. Emily nodded again, unable to speak. Then she stepped out of the car and stood for a moment under the drizzle. Watching Daniel's car disappear down the street until his taillights faded into the dark, she walked inside, her heart heavy but clear. Mark was sitting in the living room, laptop open, papers scattered around. He looked up as she entered. Hey, you're late. Everything okay? Emily stood there, soaked from the rain, clutching the grocery bags. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, taking a deep breath, she said, Mark, we need to talk. He looked surprised. Now what's wrong? Everything, she said softly, setting the bags on the table. We don't talk anymore. We live in the same house, but it feels like we're miles apart. I miss you, Mark. I miss us. He blinked, confused. Emily, I know I've been busy, but it's just work. Things will settle down, no? She interrupted gently. It's not about work. It's about us forgetting how to see each other. You don't ask how I am anymore. You don't notice when I'm quiet, and I stopped trying to tell you. Mark's expression softened, guilt flickering in his eyes. He closed his laptop slowly. You're right. I didn't realize how far we drifted. I just thought you were fine. You always say you're fine. I'm not, she whispered. I haven't been for a long time. He stood up and walked toward her, his voice quieter. Then let's fix it. Tell me what you need, Emily, please. For the first time in months, she saw sincerity in his eyes, the same sincerity that had once made her fall in love with him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. That night, they sat together for hours, talking honestly. Emily didn't tell him about Daniel, not because she wanted to hide it, but because the story wasn't about Daniel. It was about her loneliness and the silence that had crept between them. She told Mark how she had lost herself trying to keep everything together. And Mark, for the first time, truly listened. Days turned into weeks, and things slowly began to change. Mark made an effort to come home earlier. They started cooking together again, watching old movies on weekends, even laughing at little things that used to be forgotten. It wasn't a perfect fix, it was a beginning. One morning, Emily found her old paints and brushes in the attic. She set up a small corner in the living room and started painting again. The colors felt like breathing after a long time underwater. When Mark saw her, he smiled and said, I've missed seeing you like this. And she realized she had missed seeing herself that way too. Daniel never reached out again. And Emily never looked for him. But she often thought about that rainy night in his car, the words he said, the kindness he showed. It wasn't love in the traditional sense. It was a reminder, a turning point. He had helped her see the truth without crossing any lines, without asking for anything in return. Months later, as Emily stood by the window watching the rain fall, she smiled softly. That night she thought would destroy her peace had instead rebuilt it in an unexpected way. She had faced the truth, found her voice again, and rediscovered the quiet beauty of being truly seen. She knew now that love wasn't just about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up, listening, and finding the courage to start over when everything feels lost. And in that understanding, Emily finally found peace not in someone else, but within herself.